Ralph 124C41 Plus, Chapter 11, The Flight into Space. How long he was unconscious, Ralph did not know, but when he came to his senses, the moon had sunk low on the horizon. He felt unbearably weary, and his limbs seemed too heavy to move. For a time he half lay in his seat, looking stupidly down at the ocean, his mind a blank. All at once it dawned upon him that the seat next to him was empty. "Alice, Alice," he mutters, trying to shake off his stupor. "Alice, where are you?" There was no reply. The driver, his hands on the steering disc, was slumped forward in his seat. His head sank on his breast. With a stupendous effort, Ralph manages to open the glass window in front of him. Instantly, the strong odor of chloroform almost overpowers him, and a terrible sensation of nausea forces him to cling blindly to his seat. In a moment it passes, and he is able to connect his senses again. His first thought is for Alice. His dimmed sight has cleared sufficiently for him to see that she is not in the cab. He thinks she must have fallen into the sea, and in his agony he cries aloud her name again and again. And then a recollection comes to him of her father's words on the first morning of their visit. He had feared for Alice. Someone had threatened her. Ralph forced his still wandering mind to concentrate. Someone had threatened to kidnap her, and that someone was Ferdinand 610. He recalled the stranded aerocab. Its helplessness had been a trick to deceive him and to get near enough to drug him and his driver while they took Alice away. The thought aroused him from his dreadful lethargy. With a rush his vitality came back, and he flung himself upon the stupefied driver and shook him violently. The cab was still flying at an even speed in a great circle, and Ralph saw that it was imperative that he get control of it at once, for another machine, bound evidently for New York, was bearing down upon the helpless men. With a powerful shove, he got the driver into the auxiliary seat and climbed over, seizing as he did so the steering disc. He flings it over just in time to escape the onrushing cab, whose occupants, as it passes, lean out and in fluent profanity inquire if he wanted the whole airway. Unheeding, Ralph sets the steering disc toward New York and proceeds to lighten the cab. Overboard goes the glass doors, cushions, matting, even the hood of the machine. Everything that he can wrench off he tosses into the dark waters beneath him. The cab, relieved of the weight of its equipment, shoots ahead at tremendous speed, and in less than 10 minutes drops onto the landing place on top of the scientist's lab, oratory. Leaving the driver where he is, Ralph dashes into the building. Meeting Peter, he does not stop, only motions him to the cab while he himself springs to the nearest telephone. And within 15 minutes, every detective and special agent has been notified of the disappearance of Alice. Ralph has immediately transmitted the lost girl's photograph to the central office, where it is placed before a telephone connected with every member of the entire police force, and the picture is reproduced for them in their portable radio instruments for 10 seconds, enabling them to get her features firmly impressed on their minds. His next act is to call the Intercontinental Hotel, where Fernand has been stopping. Upon inquiry, he is informed that Fernand has left 3 hours ago with his baggage. The destination is unknown. "I knew it," Ralph mutters to himself. On second thought, it occurs to him that it might be of advantage to visit the hotel, and as it is only a few blocks away, he flies over to it, leaving his assistants in charge of his radio stations with strict orders to record every message and to tune into everything, and to take the messages down on the recorder discs. At the hotel, he is recognized at once, and as the news has spread over the city like wildfire, he is treated with every condition. He closely questions everyone, and then asks to see the rooms where Fernand 610 has occupied. The rooms are just as their occupant has left them, and Ralph requests that he be undisturbed there for a short time. He examines every nook and corner without finding anything to give him a clue to Fernand's whereabouts, and he is about to leave when his eye catches the reflection of a light ray falling on a bright object under the dresser. Insignificant as the little metal object is, it is enough to convey a fearful picture to his mind. He recognizes it at once as a metal turning belonging to the balancer of the gyrotor of a space flyer. Evidently, the metal part has been dropped, and Fernand has not had the time to look for it. Ralph decides that Fernand has obtained a supply of the parts which are only required on a prolonged flight into space. He is now positive that Fernand 610 has carried off his sweetheart in a space flyer, and that the machine by this time is probably far away from the Earth, headed for unknown regions. It would also be practically impossible to follow without knowing the direction of the space-defying machine. In a daze, Ralph returns to his laboratory where he again calls the central office. As all space flyers must be licensed by law, he has no trouble in getting the information he desires. A new machine of a well-known Detroit firm has been registered 4 days ago, and the description of the owner answers to that of Fernand 610. Late as it was, Ralph immediately communicated with the Detroit manufacturer, who, upon hearing his reasons for the request, supplies him with all the necessary details. Ralph learns from him that the purchaser of the new machine, one of the very latest models, is Fernand, beyond any doubt, and when he is informed that the latter had plentifully supplied himself with spare parts as if for a long journey, and moreover the most significant fact that the cabin had been fitted out as a lady's boudoir, then indeed were his worst suspicions confirmed. The manufacturer also told him that the entire outside of the shell was of magnesium, an invention of Ralph's, and that this flyer was the first to be equipped with the new metal. As he concluded his conversation and disconnected, Ralph brought his clenched fist down upon the desk. Magnesium, he mutters between set teeth, the only machine out in the universe made with magnesium. Magnesium, my own magnesium, about which no one in the world knows more than I do. Perhaps the odds are not all with you, Fernand, damn you. At first thought, it might be considered a difficult feat accurately to locate a machine thousands of miles from the Earth speeding in an unknown direction somewhere in the boundless universe. The feat was easy to the scientists. As far back as the year 1800, astronomers accurately measured the distance between the Earth and small celestial bodies. But it was not until the year 2659 that Ralph 124C41+ succeeded in accurately determining the exact location of flyers in space beyond the reach of the most powerful telescope. A pulsating polarized ether wave, if directed on a metal object, can be reflected in the same manner as a light ray is reflected from a bright surface or from a mirror. The reflection factor, however, varies with different metals. Thus, the reflection factor from silver is 1,000 units, the reflection from iron 645, allomagnesium's 460, etc. If therefore a polarized wave generator were directed towards space, the waves would take a direction as shown in the diagram, provided the parabolic wave reflector was used as shown. By manipulating the entire apparatus like a searchlight, waves would be sent over a large area. Sooner or later, these waves would strike a space flyer. A small part of the waves would strike the metal body of the flyer, and these waves would be reflected back to the sending apparatus. Here they would fall on the actinoscope, which records only reflected waves, not direct ones. From the actinoscope, the reflection factor is then determined, which shows the kind of metal from which the reflection comes. From the intensity and the elapsed time of the reflected impulses, the distance between the Earth and the flyer can then be accurately calculated. The reflection factor of magnesium being 1060, Ralph succeeds in locating Fernand's space flyer in less than 5 hours' search. He finds that Fernand's machine at that time is about 400,000 miles distant from the planet Earth and apparently headed in the direction of the planet Venus. A few seconds' calculation shows that he is flying at a rate of 45,000 miles an hour. This is a great surprise to Ralph, and it puzzles him somewhat. He knows that Fernand's machine is capable of making at least 75,000 miles an hour. Ralph reasons that if he were in Fernand's place, he would speed up the flyer to the utmost. Why was flying Fernand so leisurely? Did he think himself secure? Did he think that nobody could or would follow? Or was he having trouble with the anti-gravitator? Ralph could not understand it. However, his mind had already been made up. He would pursue Fernand even though it took him into those parts of the solar system yet uncharted, and if necessary, kill him. It was now noon, and he gave sharp, quick instructions to his assistants, ordering his space flyer, the Cassiopeia, to be made ready at once. Provisions sufficient to last for 6 months were put on board, and Ralph himself installed a great number of scientific instruments, many of which he considered he might find useful. He also ordered a large number of duplicate parts of the flyer's machinery to be stowed on board in case of emergency. To the astonishment and dismay of Peter and the others, the scientist announced his intention of making the journey alone. "The fight is to be man against man, brain against brain," he says as he stands by his space flyer, which is in readiness upon the tower platform. "Today is not brute force that counts, but scientific knowledge. I will demonstrate to the world that crimes of this kind need not be tolerated." He steps onto the running board as he speaks and is about to step into the flyer when the sound of an aeroflyer descending close by makes him hesitate. It is a government flyer, and even as Ralph pauses, it lands on the platform beside his own machine, and the smartly uniformed young official springs from the seat beside the driver. Saluting Ralph, he hands him his transcribed telegram with the words, "Message from the planet governor, sir." Dismay seized the scientist as, breaking the seal of the wrapper, he reads the printed words, Unipopulous, September 34th, 2660. Planet Governor's Capital. I have just received news of the calamity that has befallen you. I extend you my sincere sympathy. I will this afternoon place at your disposal 6 government space flyers, the crews of which are absolutely under your instructions. I must, however, caution you not to enter any pursuit in person. As Planet Governor, it is my duty to advise you that you have not the right to place your person in unnecessary danger. Allow me furthermore to point out to you that under the law, plus scientists are not allowed to endanger their lives under any circumstances. I therefore command you not to leave the Earth without my permission. I have ordered your space flyer to be guarded. In high esteem, William Kendrick, 21K4, 18th Planet Governor. To Ralph 124C41 Plus, New York. Ralph read the radiogram twice before he folds it slowly and deliberately thrusts it in his pocket. Then, slowly withdrawing his hand and extending it to the government official, he says, "Well, I must obey orders." The official takes the preferred hand, and no sooner has he grasped it than he stiffens and becomes as rigid as stone. With one bound, Ralph was in his flying machine, crying to the stupefied audience, "Don't worry about him. I pricked his hand with a little catepsol. In 15 minutes, he will be all right again." He slams the door of his space flyer, and simultaneously the machine rises as if shot from a cannon, and in 10 seconds it is lost to sight. Since the Dark Ages, men have had a powerful longing to leave Earth and visit other planets. Towards the end of the 21st century, when atmospheric flying had become common, scientists began seriously to think of constructing machinery to enable man to leave the confines of the planet to which humanity is being chained. Towards the beginning of the 22nd century, economic conditions have become acute, and the enormous population of Earth, which has passed 12 billion, clamored for an adequate outlet which the planet itself could no longer furnish. The moon was regarded with longing eyes, and although the body was known to have no atmosphere and was known to be sterile, it was equally well known that Earth scientists and engineers felt that they could, in a few years' time, make it habitable. Atmospheric flying machines were, of course, totally unsuited, as they could not even reach the limits of Earth's atmosphere only 40 miles away. Obviously, to reach the moon or any other celestial body, it was necessary to devise a method of overcoming the enigmatic force known as Earth's gravity, which chains all bodies to the planet. A multitude of inventions and suggestions were made, but none proved to be of any value until the anti-gravitator was invented by an American 969L-9 in the year 2210. This scientist had made extensive studies of the gyroscope and had finally evolved a machine which, when set in motion, would rise freely and continually to rise as long as power was supplied. The action, moreover, was purely gyroscopic. 969L9 took a large hollow sphere, the rotor, inside which he built a number of independent gyroscopes, all of which traveled in fixed orbits. The large sphere, which hung in a gyroscopic frame, was made to spin around on its axis at great speed. This sphere thus acted as the flywheel of the gyroscope, and such was not influenced by the so-called horizontal gravity. As in the case of simple gyroscopes, its axis would always be in a vertical line as long as the spheric rotor was in motion. If, however, the independent gyroscopes inside of the sphere were set in motion by means of electric current, the vertical gravity, weight, was overcome, the entire contrivance rising into the air, its rising, lifting speed being directly proportional to the speed of the enclosed gyroscope rotors. From 969L-9's experimental work, the anti-gravitators were protected, and it became possible to lift a weight of 1,000 kilograms with an anti-gravitator weighing but 12 kilograms. Space flyers were equipped with from 6 to 12 large anti-gravitators attached to various points of their shells, all of which could be worked in unison or operated independently in order to control their direction. As Ralph's space flyer rushed through the atmosphere, the friction of the machine against the air made the interior uncomfortably hot in spite of the fact that the machine had triple walls, the spaces between being filled with poor heat-conducting material. After the flyer, however, had left the atmosphere, the stellar cold rapidly made itself felt. Ralph then took his bearings after he had verified by means of the polarized wave transmitter that Fernand's flyer was still heading towards Venus. He then locked the steering disc and the space flyer continued its journey in a straight line of pursuit towards the machine of Fernand. This done, Ralph flashes a radiogram asking the planet governor's indulgence for disobeying the law. Then he takes his first look at the Earth, which, since he was traveling at the rate of 80,000 miles an hour, had shrunk to the dimensions of a medium-sized orange. As he was flying towards the sun, Earth being directly behind him, it is fully illuminated and appears like a full moon. The continents and oceans are visible except where temporarily obscured by mists or clouds. The general aspect of the Earth as seen from Ralph's flyer is that of a delicate faint blue-green ball with white caps at each of the poles. The ball is surrounded by a pinkish ring near the circumference. This is the Earth's atmosphere, the white caps being snow and ice around the north and south poles. The brilliant lighted Earth is silhouetted against the inky black sky in sharp contrast. The moon, hidden behind the Earth, is not in evidence when Ralph first looks earthward. The stars shine with a brilliancy never seen from Earth. Distant constellations which ordinarily cannot be seen except with a telescope are plainly visible to him in outer space. The sun shines with a dazzling brilliancy in a pitch-black sky, and as he looked directly into its rays he would have been stricken blind. The heat of the sun in the outside space when striking objects is tremendous, and he has held his hand against the glass window of the space flyer where the sun could strike it full. His hand would have been burned in a few seconds. There was, of course, no night in the outer space. Within the bounds of the planetary system, the sun shines uninterruptedly. Time is an unknown quantity. Had it not been for the chronometer, reeling off seconds and minutes according to man's standards, time would cease to exist in the space flyer. To a man who had never left Earth, the phenomenon encountered the size of the space flyer's outer space is still more amazing. Weight is synonymous with the gravity of the Earth. The denser a celestial body, the greater its gravity. The larger such a body is, the more strongly it will attract to objects. The smaller the body, if it has the same density, the smaller its force of attraction. Thus, a man weighing 80 kilograms on a spring scale on the Earth would weigh but 30 kilograms on planet Mars. Or on the Sun, however, he would weigh 2,232 kilograms. Inside of a space flyer which had an indefinitely small gravity, objects weighed practically nothing. They were heaviest near the walls of the machine, but in the exact center of the flyer all objects lost their weight entirely. Thus, any object, regardless of its earthly weight, hung freely suspended in the center of the space flyer. It could not move up or down of its own accord, but hung stationary, motionless like a balloon in the air. The occupant of a space flyer, having no weight, moved around with astonishing ease. He almost floated around in the machine. There was no physical labor. The biggest table was no heavier than a match. The passenger in a flyer could perform an incredible amount of work without tiring or without effort. He could walk up the walls or walk upside down on the ceiling without danger of falling, as there is no up or down in outer space. Sleep was practically impossible. There was nothing to tire the occupant. Sleep is unnecessary. Dozing off is all he can do, and that could never last long except after strenuous mental work. As long as the space flyer is not too far distant from the sun, within the orbit of Mars at least, little artificial heat is needed. The sun heats one half of the flyer's shell to a fierce heat, but the side turned away from the sun is exposed to the terrible stellar cold. Absolute zero and a fairly comfortable temperature was the result. The air supply is manufactured by chemical means on board, but very little is needed, as the original supply taken from Earth is used over and over by alternating the carbonic acid gas by means of automatic generators. It is, of course, of the utmost importance that no porthole or doors leading to the outside be opened. The air will have rushed from the flyer instantly, resulting in a perfect vacuum inside the flyer and instant death to all living organisms. As the flyer moves away from the celestial body, the less the mechanical energy needed to propel it. There are, of course, exceptions. Thus, between every two celestial bodies, a point will be found where the attraction that one body exerts on the other is zero. If the flyer were brought to this point, its gyroscopes could be at rest, and the machine would not be attracted by either body. It would hang between the two just as an iron ball hangs between two powerful magnets if carefully balanced. Give it the slightest push, however, and the ball will fly to either of the magnets. The same was true of the space flyer, between two bodies at the 0 point. If it moved over the point, it was immediately attracted by one of the bodies, and if its gyroscopes refused to work, the flyer would have been dashed to pieces against the attracting body. If, however, the machine came to rest at the 0 point, it would begin to turn around on its own axis, while at the same time moving in an elliptical orbit around the Sun. The space flyer would become a tiny planet, and as such was subject to the universal laws of the planetary system. It was not hard to steer the space flyer. The nearer it came to a celestial body, the faster the gyroscopes worked, and the further it drew away, the slower their movement. After Ralph had thoroughly inspected the entire flyer, he devoted his full attention to the course of Fernand's machine. At the rate at which he was flying, he computed that he would overtake Fernand in 10 hours, provided the latter did not increase his speed meanwhile. Fernand, when Ralph left Earth, had a handicap of 400,000 miles an hour. He was moving at a rate of 45,000 miles an hour. Ralph's machine had made 80,000 miles an hour since the start. If everything went well, he would overtake the other in 10 or 11 hours. As there was nothing else to do, he busied himself in the laboratory near the conning tower at the top of the flyer in an attempt to make the hours pass more rapidly. With all its speed, his machine seemed to crawl. He was in an agony of impatience. At the end of the 9th hour, he finally sighted Fernand's machine through his telescope. He then tried to signal Fernand by radio, but the other either did not hear or else did not want to answer. 11 hours after his departure from Earth, his machine draws to within a few hundred meters of Fernand's. After careful maneuvering, he brings the machine parallel to the other and looks through one of the heavy plate windows, sees the strained, drawn, and ghastly white face of Fernand staring at him. Ralph moves a few levers and then closes a switch. A hissing sound is heard, and Fernand is seen to fall backwards. The window turns green at the same moment. Ralph has struck him senseless with his radio perforer. In a few minutes, he anchors his flyer to the other by means of a powerful electromagnet. Then he pushes the connecting tube of his own flyer into the tube joint of Fernand's machine. With great care, he makes the joint airtight. Taking a coil of rope, he opens the porthole and crawls through the tube leading into the other flyer. Arriving at the other end, he makes sure that the joint of Fernand's machine is tight before he moves on. Fernand lays unconscious on the floor, and in a twinkling, Ralph has bound him with the rope. In high excitement, he bounds upstairs to gain the room Alice should be occupying. His heart throbs tempestuously. In another moment, he will hold his sweetheart in his arms. Arriving on the next floor, he stands still for a moment and listens. There is no sound except for the gentle purring of the gyroscopic machinery. He goes from one room to the other, then to the last one. The door is open. He enters with a strange feeling of dread. The room is empty. Apparently it had never been used. In terror, Ralph runs from one end of the flyer to the other. He looks in every corner, in every closet. He can find neither Alice nor her maid. Where were they hidden? To make sure, he goes all over the ground again, more thoroughly. After the most careful scrutiny of every inch of the machine, he falls limply into a chair and buries his face in his hands. Alice was not on board the flyer. End of chapter 11.